My wife is vertically challenged. She asked me if I'd build her a step stool for the kitchen. I went to digging around in the shop to see if I could find some wood that would work, and I found some really nice cherry that an old shop teacher gave to me. He must have had the wood for at least 20 years before I got it. I downloaded some plans from woodsmithplans.com. A classic cherry step stool was what I was going to build. Everything seemed to be going good once I cut all the wood down to size. It was pretty rough, but I think it's going to work. After rough cutting all the pieces, I headed over to the joiner to give everything a good straight edge. One of the things that the plans call for were a floating tenon. That's something I've never heard of before. Sounds like this is going to be a skill builder step stool. The other thing that was going to be a great skill builder was that everything had to be cut on a 5-degree angle so that the stool would have a broader footprint. Cutting the rails to the proper width is very important. I needed 8 of them in total. Here I am cutting them, and in each one we'll have to have a dado in the ends. Of course, everything needed to have a good smooth surface, in that the wood was pretty dirty. The belt sander was a great place to take care of that. Also, it helped me to make sure that each piece was the same thickness. A couple of things that I think were skill builders in this was the dados in the end of the rails and making the floating tendons. This is a Grizzly belt sander I bought a couple of years ago. It was a great price. Only problem I've had with it is the belt tends to wander either right or left as I'm using it, or it don't want to turn at all. So you'll see me a couple of times trying to force it. I've called Grizzly and gotten instructions on how to repair it. The step stool side panels are in 2 pieces. This gives you a chance to cut all of the angles that you need, and also to be sure that you've got the dados in the right place and the arch for the bottom. This would be almost impossible once it has been glued up. So I make all my cuts now, and then when I glue it up, should fit nicely together. One thing about this stool, it's coming along pretty good now. Like I was saying, all of the pieces had this 5-degree bevel on them. So I had to make this little jig or a board cut at a 5-degree angle so that I could cut the dados in the end of the rails. I also had camera problems. You could probably see the difference in color here. I had one set for incandescent light and one set for fluorescent lights. But anyway, you'll see how I attach this to my miter gauge for my 5-degree angle. Here I am using that board to cut my 5-degree angle in each side panel piece. It would have been impossible to do this if I had glued up the pieces already. But with this setup, it makes it easy. Very easy to put all those dados in there and everything will fit together. The dados are 3/8 of an inch wide. So I've taken my setup and ran it through a couple of times with a regular blade to make the dado exactly 3/8 of an inch wide. The 2 smaller sides and the 2 larger sides had 2 each. So there was a total of 2, 4, 6, 8 of these that needed to be cut. With this setup, it made it quick and easy. My next step will be creating the tenons that float inside these dados. Well, that ought to be a skill builder because I've never made a floating tenon before. You'll see the floating tenons later in the video. Here I am putting a 5-degree taper on each side piece before I glue it up. After I cut this piece off, I'll need to take it and retape it to the piece so that I can glue the top panels and the short panel together. Here I am taping the 2 pieces, trying to line them up correctly. Don't need anything out of line. You'll notice on the other side that I have labeled all of my pieces, where they go, and which piece connects to the other piece. After gluing up the side panels, I put a 5-inch radius at the bottom of each one, and use the bandsaw to make quick work of cutting these out. You'll see the dados at the top of the short piece and the top of the long step on this side. It would have been impossible to cut those if I had glued the panel up first. So that's the purpose for gluing it up after I've cut all those pieces. And also after I've put a 5-degree bevel on the bottom and on the top of each one of these. The bottom being where it connects with the floor and the top being where the step goes. Next, we'll do some sanding. The oscillating spindle sander makes a great way to cover up all those little spots that I missed on the bandsaw. You never can get a line just perfectly straight. So I always leave the line and then use something like this kind of a sander to get right up to the edge of the line. So when you look at the stool, it looks like I've done a great job. It's all that special equipment I have. It's called sandpaper. It worked out pretty good. The wood is 3/4 of an inch thick, and the plans call for a 1/2 inch round over bit to be used on all of the sides. So the router table comes in very handy right here. Everything went through real smooth, and when I got through, I had the top to do, which is the steps to do, and they went very quickly also. They need a round over on the top and the bottom of the board for the top step and the bottom step. All that's left is some sanding and making those floating tendons, and then it's time to glue it up. So let's finish up with this router and get to the sanding. I took a piece of my cherry 3/4 inch board and ran it through the planer until I got the 3/8 of an inch for the floating tenon. This is one of the tenons, and here is another one for one side. I will need a total of 8 of these also. Getting very careful not to cut myself here. So here are my tenons to length. Now I have to width. Now I have to cut them to length. Using the little pencil eraser helps hold them in place. Those are floating tenons. They'll fit in those dados, and I'll show you what they look like. Each one of the rails required a dado also. There was no way I was able to hold this board and run it through the saw with a dado blade attached. So I made this little jig about 5 inches tall, and the back side was about 2, glued it up, and used it to run the piece through the saw and make the dados. The tenons will float in those slots. Here they are glued up with holes for the screws also. And here's one finished. You see the 5-degree angle, and also how they're glued into that piece. They will now float in the stool side pieces. All they'll need is a little bit of glue to help hold them in. And here it is, the finished piece. No finish on it yet, but I just did a dry run of putting it together to see what it would look like. You can see the little tenons sticking out, which give it more of an elegant look. Once it's glued up, it'll be a very sturdy stool. I think I'll put a few pictures at the end of the video so you can see what it looks like. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.